Hello and welcome to another video. Today we'll be taking a look at the Baku conference. We'll look at what it was, why it was done, who was there, what were the consequences of this conference. We'll look at some books about the Congress and also some quotes from the Congress. Now, first of all, what even was the Baku conference? Well, it was a Congress of the People of the East. At least that was its official name. It was held from September the 1st to September the 8th in 1920. Its location was of course in Baku, Azerbaijan, which was then part of Soviet Russia. The organizers were the Bolshevik Party and the Communist International, the Comintern. The purpose was to rally support for Bolshevik ideals among the peoples of the East, promoting anti-imperialist and revolutionary sentiments. The context, the historical background, it occurred during a period of upheaval following World War I and the Russian Revolution, when many Asian and Middle Eastern territories were still under colonial rule. The Soviet Union sought to expand its influence and counteract the imperialism of Western powers by fostering anti-colonial movements. Now, let's take a look at why it was done. Well, mainly it was to promote communism. The Bolsheviks wanted to export their Bolshevik model of governance and social organization to the East, integrating these regions into a global communist movement. Their strategy was to use the Congress as a platform to disseminate communist ideology among representatives of various national liberation movements. And there was also, of course, this anti-imperialist strategy where they wanted to undermine Western colonial rule by encouraging nationalist revolts and fostering resentment against imperial powers. They wanted to do this by empowering local leaders and revolutionaries with ideological and practical support to challenge colonial administrations. They also, of course, wanted to build alliances. They wanted to establish strategic alliances with emerging nationalist leaders and movements to secure Soviet influence in the East. Their approach was to engage in dialogue, offer assistance, and create a network of collaborators who aligned with Soviet goals. Of course, it was also a big part was propaganda. They wanted to showcase Soviet commitment to global revolution and solidarity with oppressed peoples, enhancing the USSR's image as a champion of anti-imperialism. The effect was that the Congress broadcasted messages of unity and resistance to a global audience, countering Western narratives. Also, they addressed internal challenges. They strengthened domestic support by diverting attention from internal strife and presenting a cohesive international front. They reinforced Bolshevik legitimacy and resolve within the Soviet Union by emphasizing their role in leading worldwide revolutionary efforts. Now, let's look at who was there. Well, of course, delegates. The Congress composed from approximately 1,891 delegates from 37 countries, including revolutionaries, nationalists, and representatives of various liberation movements. It was also quite diverse, had delegates who represented a broad spectrum of ethnic, cultural, and political backgrounds, reflecting the geographic diversity of Asia and the Middle East. Some key figures were Grigory Zinoviev, who was the chairman of the Congress. He was head of the Comintern, delivered major speeches outlining Bolshevik goals. Next up is Nariman Narimanov, who was an Azerbaijani Bolshevik leader, significant local figure in the Congress organization. Next up is Karl Radek. He was a Comintern member, influential in shaping the Congress agenda and rhetoric. Now we have Mirza Davud Husseinov. He was an Azerbaijani Bolshevik leader, active in regional revolutionary activities. Last of all is Mikhail Pavlovich Tomsky. He was a Soviet trade union leader involved in discussing on labor and workers' rights. Some other notable delegates were Indian representatives, including M.N. Roy and other Indian revolutionaries advocating against British colonial rule. There were also some Turkish delegates whose representatives from Turkey advocated for anti-imperialist struggle post-Ottoman Empire. There was also Persian or Iranian delegates. They promoted independence from foreign influence, reflecting growing national sentiments. Now, let's look at what the consequences were. Well, first of all, increased influence. This Congress bolstered Soviet influence in the Asian and Middle Eastern regions, laying the groundwork for future diplomatic and revolutionary activities. It enhanced Soviet soft power through ideological alignment with anti-colonial and nationalist movements. It was also the foundation of later movements. It provided ideological and logistical support to various nationalist movements, influencing the trajectory of regional independence struggles. It also contributed to the eventual success of many anti-colonial movements in the mid-20th century. Of course, it also fostered tensions with Western powers. It intensified geopolitical tensions as Western colonial powers perceived the Congress as a direct challenge to their authority. It led to reactions, well, first of all, increased scrutiny and hostility towards Soviet actions in Asia and the Middle East by Western nations. It also had internal Soviet dynamics. It helped solidify Bolshevik control within the Soviet Union by presenting an image of international solidarity and revolutionary leadership. The effect was that the Bolsheviks could bolster domestic support for the Soviet government's foreign policy and revolutionary agenda. Of course, at this Congress there was also cultural exchange. It facilitated the exchange of revolutionary ideas and strategies among diverse groups, fostering a sense of shared struggle and unity against imperialism. This was quite significant because it encouraged the blending of Soviet and local revolutionary traditions, influencing the development of communism in various cultural contexts. Now let's look at some books about the Congress. First of all, we have The Baku Congress of the People of the East by Mikhail Reina. It provides a comprehensive account of the Congress, its organization, and its impact on Soviet policy and international relations. It focuses on the strategic objectives and outcomes of the Congress from a historical perspective. Next up is a book which is called Communism and Nationalism in the Middle East, the Comintern and the Arab East, 1990 to 1943, by Walter Laqueur. It explores the relationship between Comintern and nationalist movements in the Middle East with significant coverage of the Baku Congress. It analyzes the interplay between communist ideology and nationalist aspirations in the Arab world. Next up is Soviet Orientalism and the Creation of Central Asian Nations by V. H. Bundman. It examines Soviet policies in Central Asia, including the influence of the Baku Congress on regional nationalism. It focuses on the cultural and political impact of Soviet strategies in the creation of national identities in Central Asia. The next book I have to offer is The Soviet Empire, a study in disintegration by Alexander Yanov. It provides a broader context of Soviet policies in the East, including the strategic implications of the Baku Congress. It discusses the long-term consequences of Soviet efforts to export communism and their eventual disintegration. The last book I have to offer is Soviet Nationalities and Policy in Practice, From Lenin to Gorbachev by Jeremy Smith. It covers Soviet nationalities policy and its implementation with references to the Baku Conference and its impact on Soviet interactions with Eastern nations. Investigates the practical outcomes of Soviet nationalities policies in various regions, including those influenced by the Baku Congress. Now, let's look at some quotes from the Congress. First of all, we have Grigory Zinoviev. To oppress peoples of the East, the time has come to unite against the yoke of imperialism and capitalism. The revolution in Russia is the beacon for all the nations fighting for their liberation. Zinovьev's speech emphasizes the unity of oppressed nations in their struggle against colonial rule and capitalism, framing the Soviet Revolution as a guiding example. Next up is Nariman Narimanov. Our task is to bring together the struggle of the East with the revolutionary movements of the West. Only through a united front can we overthrow the old world order. Narimanov highlighted the need for solidarity between Eastern and Western revolutionary movements to achieve global change. Next is Karl Radek. He said, "The peoples of the East must take their destinies into their own hands. The Soviet Union offers its support, but fight for freedom must be waged by the people themselves." Radek's remarks underscored the importance of self-determination and local leadership in the fight against colonialism, with Soviet support as a catalyst. Next up is a delegate from India. He said, "We have come here to learn and to join forces with our comrades in the Soviet Union. Together, we will forge a path to independence and end the domination of foreign powers over our lands." It reflects the sentiments of many delegates who saw the Congress as an opportunity to gain support and forge alliances for their own independence movements. Last up is a delegate from Turkey. He said, "Our struggle against imperialism is not just for national liberation, but for the freedom and dignity of all peoples. The revolution must be global, or it will fail." The context is that he emphasized the broader goals of the Congress in linking local anti-imperialist efforts with the global revolutionary movement. That was it. Thank you for listening.